Okay, I just want to go back to the beginning, Mitzvah Kuf Yud, and we'll try to go on. Mitzvah Kuf Yud, a mitzvah ha'asiris umeyo, he should tzivonu shetehei atahara, he should tzivonu here, it's a Rambam, is the Alma of the Amalno, which is a Poshta Tzivui, and this would be in sync, I was talking about, but it's a very odd thing that basically there's a mikdama, and there's a new postulate for the mitzvah's tumah and discussing him in terms of rishus. He does not do the same thing in the mitzvah's ta'ala. The only one that he actually talks about is mikvah. And however, in mechatos and in taras mitzvah, you get the impression of the chiyuv. That by itself is certainly acceptable, but the question is, what exactly are you doing? Because the taras mitzvah by itself, without the tefillah, or the hazoras mechatos without the tefillah, as far as I know, is absolutely nothing. So what does exactly mean that there's a chiyuv to do it and you don't get anything from it? I don't get it exactly. I'm not sure that I'm right. Then he continues, Shetiye atahara min hatzoras b'ma'aseh hakosuv. So what he's trying to say, that's in Torah Shebiksav, and as the Torah Shebiksav is, v'hu eitz erez v'ezel v'shni salas u'shtei tziporim u'mayim chayim. So the interesting thing, first of all, is the word ma'aseh over here. The Rambam has a few different words in Arabic for ma'aseh. Sometimes it's amal, and sometimes it's pa'al, something like that. And sometimes he has this new word, which is tanah, which is, and this word ma'aseh, he uses in mitzvah samach gimel, samach dalid, samach hey, samach vav, and samach zayin, and he uses it by chalitza also, even though a priori it's a word that you might have used for artisan instead of a label like amal, but he seems to use it in those mitzvahs which have a seder. The seder ma'aschal, there's a seder. I'm not sure if this word has anything to do with it, but the fact is that's what he usually does. Then, if that's correct, there's a very interesting thing going on over here. Because going back to Shorish Yud Aleph, what the Rambam does in Shorish Yud Aleph and the Shorish Yud Beis. Shorish Yud Aleph is both Yud Aleph and Yud Beis are talking about Chelkei Mitzvah. But in my opinion, there are two different types of Chelkei Mitzvah. The Chelkei Mitzvah Yud Aleph are those things that you logically have done bevasachas, bekibutzam, like lulav. And even though lulav, the Ram Shita is, you can be yotze b'zeh achazeh, but however, it's only if it's b'rishusay that you have some type of tziruf, and it really is one lekicha. Heke mitzera is all together. All the different prumim, oitasofim, tamayika, we'll see a mitzvah. Okay. Here in Yud Aleph and Yud Beis, one second, Yud Aleph is basically those things which are babasachas. In Yud Beis is chronologically, there's a seder of Pula A, B, C, D, E, F, and G to get you to what you want to have done. That's Ola, Chatos, Oshom, Shlomim, Mincha. So the oddity is when he's formulating Yud Aleph, he formulates Taras HaMitzvos. We have no clue why it's there. Because Taras HaMitzvos is not done b'bas achas. The Tzipor Hashchuta precedes everything, and it's just a place where you table. It's what you use to be the Tfilas Adam. So l'cheira, and then is the shiluach of the chaya. So it's a seder dvorim. So I would have assumed that he should use the Arabic, that he refers to the mitzvah samach gimel samach daled samach hey and samach vav, which he actually does here, which is interesting. But you do not find that in Yud Aleph, and maybe he might have changed his mind and decided really to put this really in the midst of Shorish Beis, and he certainly has the this noun of Maaseh twice here in this mitzvah. He has it later also. Okay. Now, just for the list, Eitz, Erez, Ezo, V'Ezo, V'Shni Salas, U'Shtei Tzipor V'Mayim Chaim. So, here, the Raman Shorish Aleph in discussing the Chalokim, which are part of the Chelke Mitzvah, Taras HaMitzvos, is like this. Hish Tzivonu Shetiyeh Hataha L'Natzalas. Here, but he doesn't mention, see, in Yud Aleph, he leaves out Kli Cheres. Excuse me, so in Yud Aleph he mentions Kli Cheres. Let's just take Yud Aleph for a second. Let's just do it right. Here it is, I'm sorry. Aleph. Here it is. He says like this. V'al-pi adin hazeh atzmoi ein roi limnois amroi b'mitzera shehu toho b'shtei tziporim v'eitz erez v'ezo v'shni salas u'mayim chayim u'kli cheres. See, here he has the end, the Kli Cheres is not here. And the question is why? So one could claim that maybe Kli Cheres is not mentioned over here because only Hakdama, as the Ram says in Shorish Yud, that a Hakdama is not in Minyan HaMitzvos. It's only a Hechsher. It's that which you hold the Kli. The Hazor is done with the Eretz v'Ezov, Eitz Eretz v'Ezov, U'Shli Salas, U'Shtei Tzipom, U'Mayim Chaim. Then you have to say, really, that the Kli Cheres is only holding, but the dam of the Sipa Shchuta is part of the Hazor. So it's part of the mitzvah. Okay. Now, U'Shi'aseh bohem kol ma shenizkar. So this is a priori a very innocuous statement. Shi'aseh bohem kol ma shenizkar. But I asked the question, what's kol ma shenizkar? Why is he stressing kol ma shenizkar? So I would suggest is like this. Kol ma shenizkar is you have to do everything. And the each one of them are ma'akiv the other one. And the mitzvah is the asiyas hakol. And That's what he says in Shiur Al Vazeh Hekesh Be'atzmo Ein Roy Sheimne Omroy B'Mitzvah Shu Yito B'Shtei Tziporim V'Chayis V'Eitz Erez V'Ezo B'Shni Tolaas U'Mayim Chayim Kli Cheres B'Sheish Mitzvos Avotaris Mitzvah Achas B'Chol Toreho U'Ma Shitztarach Bo Me'elu V'Zuos Kol Megiluch Ki Kol Elu Hein Chelkei HaMitzvah Shenitztavinu Bo V'Utaris Mitzvah V'Ushitiyeh Al HaTorah Hazeh. And then he continues, V'chemosh kol ma shnizboyer l'cho shatachlish hamavukash lo yagia v'chelik echol mi'osim hachalokim. You don't fulfill the mitzvah, you don't reach its purpose without everything. Hinei hu mavua ki kibutzam hua inyan animna k'ma kos mitzvah. V'chein ta'arosai, and this is the important line, in Shiur Al Loi Sagia El B'chol Ma Shezocha Min HaTziporim V'Eitz Erez V'Shni Tolas V'Agiluach V'Os Tagia Lo Ta'arosai. And this is a reference to that line in Shiur Al. Then he does it again. U'B'zeh HaMaisa. It's the exact same Arabic word which Ram used before. Bi'atzmoi u'b'zeh ha'ma'aseh bi'atzmo yitayeh ha'odom v'habayis. Here's something amazing. He says that the tahara is not only in odom but also in bayis, and it's the exact same seder. The exact same scenario. And Kamo Shibia Kosam, those are the psukim in Perek Yudalit from Mem Ches to Nun Gimel. Now here is something very interesting. Because here he's saying that the tahara of the odom and the tahara of the bayis are identical. However, when you read Shiur Aleph, or even before you get to Shiur Aleph, isn't it a little bit, what happens over here? When you finish with the Adam, with the Ta'at Rishon, you have another Giluach afterwards, okay? And another Tahara. And even after that Tahara, you have something called a Korbanos Mechusei Kapara, which you find in in Aseh Ayin Zayin, and he's ready to talk about, and he has each one the separate. He was ready to accept they should all be one mitzvah, but since they're different titles, they're different mitzvahs. And you see, let's start slowly before. Excuse me, I'm sorry. We should start like this. The question is, what's the point of saying it's the same performance. So let's accept that it's the same performance. The Ram says like this. He has a general principle that if you have a mataya and it's the same mataya, even if it's for different things, it's all one mitzvah. And he says basically in the mitzvah Ayin Zayin that if the tahara of the Daled Mechusei Kapara would be the same tahara, then it would be only one mitzvah because it's the same performance. And that's what he writes. Hashem Yodea shezeh hoyeroi b'li safek im hoye korban kol echod me'elu abo Mechusei Kapara korban echod lo yishtane k'mo tairis Tara b'mikvah b'mayim. Since all the same and all the Tmeim have the same Tara, therefore it's one mitzvah. Shumin mimini ataris shechayva kol odom. But since they changed his chavos karbonos, so we know that it's not the same Tara and the separate mitzvahs. So the Rambam is reversing this argument and is saying over here, Rabbi Yisai, that's why the Taras Odom, the Tyrus, Habayis are one mitzvah because ubezeh hamaaseh. It's with the exact same performance. It's the same argument in Ayin Zayin, but there he uses it. If it's not the same, he uses the split mitzvahs and uses this argument to bring them together as one mitzvah. However, the whole argument is very odd, to say the least. And the reason is the following. Because Batim and Odom are not the same. And it's not the fact that they're in two different objects, that's really irrelevant, as we saw from Mitzvah and Zion, that even if you have many objects, the same if it's the same Torah, it's the same mitzvah. However, in Maseches Negoyim and Perek Yud Daled, Mishnah Beis, the Ram is very clear that the Mishnah is very clear that Mitzvah after the Tar Rishon with the Tziporim, he is a Tomei Sheretz. He's not Matam Bi anymore, but he's Tomei Sheretz. And the Ram quotes it in Hilchos Tumas Saras, Perek Yud Aleph Halacha Aleph and Beis, Tyrus Mitzvah, Mitzvas Aseh, B'tiglachos K'shitayim Mitzvas Aseh, Ketzat, Metanis Mitzvah, V'chulei, V'achach, Mechabis Begoda, V'tevel, V'yitayim Milatam B'bir, U'milatam Mishkav V'moishav, V'chulei. Kol Shivas Hayomu Elu Adayin Avatuma, Mitame Odom V'kelim B'maga V'loi B'masa. That's the Sheretz. And afterwards he needs another Ta'ala. In Bayis, it's not that at all. In Bayis, with its Tziporim and the Eitz Eretz, Shni Solas, you basically finish the process and the Torah is complete. So we don't understand how the Rambam could equate the two. And even more than that, maybe you can flip the whole thing. Let's say like this. You see, if you look at Shir Aleph, the Rambam mentions, besides the Tziporim and the whole Seder, he mentioned Tiglachas Rishona. And he says like this. He says, V'chein talosai lo susag el b'chol ma sheniska hatziporim v'eitz erez v'ezo v'shni tolas v'hatiglachas v'oz tusag lo hataro. However, so it means very clearly that the tiglachas is part of the tahara of the tziporim. But then you ask yourself your question, if that's true, then l'chera, you can't equate the taras hamitzera of the Odom with the bias, because the whole idea of tiglachas in bias is absolutely ridiculous. But interesting, the Rambam does not mention tiglachas over here in the midst of Taras and Mitzvah. So you can say, oh, he does it here, and it's not just an accident. He didn't mention tiglachas because he wanted to make the Taras Habayis and the Taras Odom identical. And you have to leave out the tiglachas. And in Yud Aleph, his whole focus, in Shiur Aleph, his whole focus is only the Taharas Odom, and that's what he's talking about. The only question is, what's the issue? So l'cheira, you would assume that in Shiur Aleph, he's assuming tiglachas is part of the tahara. And over here, he's saying very clearly that it's not part of the tahara. The question is, why should you come to that conclusion? It's in the parasha. But if you look at the psukim, there's something strange going on. Because the Rambam says, you see the psukim, just one second. Yeah. If you open up the Chumash, you'll see the Tahara, that the Taglachas is mentioned in a very strange place. And the Torah says, after it mentions the whole Seder Tziporim, it says V'toher, without mentioning Taglachas. And then it says V'chibes Begodov, and then it says the Tiglachas, and then the Rechitza B'mayim. So in the middle of the Rechitza B'mayim and the Kibus Begodim, it mentioned Tiglachas. And it already says V'toyer. So you could have suggested that in the Pshuta Shel Mikra, where the Ram was learning over here, maybe in this mitzvah, that the Tiglachas is not part of the Taharas Mitzvah, but it's somehow machshir that the tefillah should be a tefillah. And maybe that's the issue. In Yud Aleph, he learns that the Tiglachas is part of the tefillah. In here, he's concerned about the placing of the Tiglachas together with the mikvah, and it says v'toy here, and it finishes the whole seder of the tzipurim, and he says maybe it's not part of the tzipurim. The tzipurim is not part of the the tiglachas is not part of the tahara. If the tiglachas is not part of the tahara, then you could equate the taharas hamitzera and the taharas habayis and say they're identical, and that's exactly what he does here. Now, he says like this. Hine kvar hisboyer lecho ki mini hadvorim metaharin min atuma b'teresenu shleisha minim. There are three types. There's the Meinida and the Taras and Mitzera, which are very specific, and there's the Mechatas, which is a general Tahara. However, there's no mention over here of Mechusa Kapora. And if you remember, the Ram has a whole discussion in Mitzvah Ayin Zayin about the Tahara of Mechusa Kapora. That's what Ram said. Hashem Yodea, Shezeh Hoyeroi. He wants to know maybe Zav and Zova should have been one mitzvah. because it has the identical same tahara, and he says, Zehoyroi, Blisafik, Im Hoya Korban Kol Echol Me'elu. I mentioned it before. Al Buchus Kapo, Korban Echol. Okay. So I'll ask you something. After you're finished and you have 4 mitzvahs, Al Buchus Kapora, what happens? Are there 4 mitzvahs of tahara and they're different taharas? Or the mitzvah is the Chovas HaKrova? And if I had to vote for something, I would tell you in the Rambam's famous reference, it's not the tahara, but it's Chovas HaKrova. And the Chovas HaKrova of this choli, the choli of Zav, the choli of Zova, the choli of Mitzera, and whatever happened with the Leda. How do I know that? Because the Ram quotes it in the group of mitzvahs around Ayin Zion, which is the group of mitzvahs of Korbanos. And he doesn't quote it together with the mitzvahs of Tahara, with Mei Nida and Tefillah and Taharas HaMitzvah. So that's what I would say. Next. Hine kvar izboya הדבורים המטהרים מן הטומאה בתורתנו 3 מינים, אחד כולו ושניים מיוחדים. בשני מינים ממיני הטומאות. They're specific in 2 types of omnom. That means omnom hakolel hu tara hatahara b'mayim. I would suggest that he says tahara b'mayim over here because he wants to have a generic way of referring to the tahara. Because if you recall, zav requires mayim chayim, and the other tumas can be relieved by may mikvah. But if you have a generic term mayim, you're taking care of everything. So he says hatahara b'mayim, and each with its dinim. Hine kol al kol tomei lo tagir lo tahara elo acha sheitaya b'mayim. V'amin hasheni mei nida hu davar miyucha b'tumas nida tumas mes mei nida tumas mes. V'amin hashlishi eitz erez v'ez shisalas v'shtei tzipor b'mayim chayim hu davar miyucha b'mitzaras. See, here again, it's a very strange thing. Is the main nida a separate mitzvah, which is matayah the mace, where there actually, is there any chaloshim in the main nida? It's only with the mikvah. Similarly, with the tziporim and the eitz erez, shnisalas, by them themselves, there's nothing in only the mikvah. So I could have made a statement, maybe there should be only 1 mitzvah. And in 2 peculiar cases, the meinida and the hazos, the tziporium, whatever, maybe they're only a machshir for mikvah. And there shouldn't be mitzvahs, mini mitzvahs at all. So you say there is a chal Hashem, and I was ready to talk about that there might be a chayva, even if the main mikvah is not. Is a rishus. You do something by them itself. It's the same question over and over again. We don't understand how the Rambam is actually counting this. But the truth is, you have the same problem in the Ramban. I think I mentioned it because the Ramban doesn't count. So maybe say he doesn't count Mei Nida, not only the Tumah, but also the Tahara, because there's no Chiyuv. And he knocks out Mei Nida from the minyan. Or maybe he puts it as part of the mitzvah paraduma. We don't know. Now, Ukva his boy and mishpali mitzazu kulom lataloima taras tahar rishayna. So the mitzvah is called tahara horishayna. Okay. Then he has a new mitzvah. In Kuf Yud Aleph, called Tziva Mitzvah Galeach. And L'chayra, and he calls it Hu Tahara Shnia. So it becomes very confusing, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, even how more confusing it is. Why is there only one Tahara in Mitzvah, and he calls the Tahara Rishona? What happened to the Tahara Shnia? And we'll talk about this more. However, there's something interesting. You see, when I asked the question before about the Mei Nida is only complete with the Tahara B'mikvah, and the Tziporim only complete with the Tahara B'mikvah. The truth is, that's not 100% true. Because that's when you talk about Odom. When you talk about Nigi Batim, what do? You do the Tziporim, okay? Now, you know yourself, there's no Giluach. And what happens after the Tziporim? There's a Tahara. So there's a bona fide Tahara with the Tziporim. So the Mechatus is, you see it as a bona fide Tahara, we have to know what it means. And I would try to explain what's going on. There's no mikvah nigibatim. The pshat is because mikvah is to remove something was nitma, and the mikvah is metayer it. Nigibatim, it's not the pshat that the even is nitma. It's just that the even is metame. And with the Tahar Rishayna, the even is not metame anymore. And there's no need for Tahar for mikvah. This can be illustrated by Rab Chaim Mipir Shmuel. He talks about Tumas Ksomim because the Gemara says anything which is Makabel Tumah could be a place where if you find the Kesem is Tameh. But if it's not Makabel Tumah, so the Kesem is Torah. Chachamon Geizer, Ksom Mon and Dov Makabel Tumah. And what's an example of a Dov Shen and Makabel Tumah? Could go in bias. There's no tumas good ksom on bias. So someone asked Rab Chaim, the bias mekabel tumas legoyim. So Rab Chaim said, the ma shehi mekabelas tumas legoyim ein ze nikra dova hamakabel tumah. The bias is not makabel tumah. The achshav ein lo shum chalis din v'rak sheyipo. Boy nega yase abayis sheretz. The bayis comes to sheretz, but it's not makabel tumah. The ein nikra dov makabel tumah. V'choze echod v'hikshe mihodi aminon ein misachsim b'dov makabel tumah. Afilu b'nitzi pishton mishum shemakabel tumah is negoyim shesi v'erev. So Chaim says that's no question. The beged muvad ma shenase kisheretz k'moi bebatim. Od yesh kan gam tumas begodim shnika shabegin mekabel tumah. But it's not through the maga. V'araya gam achay shesoa neged ton tefila v'harei demuvad mashu chefse shel tumah, and that's only when the neg is there. See, the bias is only chetz tumah. So when the nigga goes away and you have the tahara of the tziporim, there's nothing more to talk about. But in nigga begodim, when the nigga goes away, od yesh kan kabbalas tumah. The apish see ve'erev sheyesh b'hu tumas yesh b'hu tumas negoyim. The l'chol hoyef shaloima the lo nisrabo raka tumas negoyim sheyeh nika nega. But it's not that there's a begging which is makabel, because the shesiva erev is not a begging called dinei atera. Avol din habeis sheyesh kan kabbalas tuma the tumas begodim efshe de lezer lo nisrabo v'dina b'chol torah kuli ain't a begging. Ochein hari mavur b'kor the gam shesiva erev tono kibus acharei shesoa nega. Kibus is kabbalas tuma. Ulohochi ein mesachim boy. So batim don't have tefillah b'mikvah because the batim are not makabel tumah. Now, here you have to go back to the other question I was asking. Rambam says over here that there are three types of tahara. There's mei nida, mei mikvah, and tahara rishona from mitzvah. And then, right afterwards, the next mitzvah, he calls it tahara shniya, and he says it's only one min. And l'chayr puts it together because it's also a tahara, which is mamish very odd. Besides that, the Mishnah l'chayra is saying the opposite, because the Mishnah in Perek Yud Daled, Mishnah Aleph, Beis, and Gimel goes like this. The whole Seder from the Tziporim. And then V'tova v'hizeh Sheva Pomim. Then V'chulei heavy Tara Kol B'so V'chibis B'godov. V'toval Toho Metame B'biyah V'arihu Metame Kisheretz. That's after the Tarishon. Nichnas lifnim, and he calls it Nichnas lifnim and Achim. Menudu mi beisai, Shivas Yomim, Vyos Tashamita. B'yoim hashvi'i, Migaleach Tiglach HaShniya, Ki Tiglach HaSarishon. Kibis B'gola B'tol, Tol Miltam V'Kisheretz. V'ar Tfu Yoim, Oicho B'maise, Herev Shimshoy, Oicho B'Trum. Okay? She have a tara from Tumubia and Mishkav Moshav. That's the Tilachas Risha. That's the Tziporim. Then you have Tiglach HaShniya, which is Metaya with the Mikvah, is Metaya that there shouldn't be Kisheretz, and have Shimsho is Eichel B'Trum. Hevi Kapolosoi, Eichel B'Kochim. Then it says like this. Nimsu Gimel Taharetz B'Mitzayah. What is the Nimsu Gimel Taharetz Mitzayah? Is the Tziporim, the Tiglach HaShniya, and the Mechus Kippurim. So how is it the Rambam says that there's really only one Tahara in Mitzayah? And then it's very odd. And you know, Rabbi Isai, this is also more than that. It's not only the ta'ala. You see, he says like this. He says not only in the Mishnah, and it's in the Pirush HaMishnah also like that. Then further, so we don't know exactly we have no clue why the Rambam decided that there are only 3 taharos, and the taharos, which the Mishnah clearly says is another 2, somehow are not mentioned. So understand that maybe that the mechusa kippurim, there's 2 dinim, and the Ram classifies it as a mitzvah, not betur the tara shabo, betur the chavis hakova shabo. But what does it mean with the tiglachas over here? Tiglachas shniya. There's nothing else except for the tara. So that's very confusing. Now, here, ukva hispoyer mishpatei mitzvah zu kulam loima taras mitzera rishayne v'miseches negoyim. And this l'cher is Perek Yudaled, Mishnah Aleph, and Mishnah Beis. And here is not mentioned tiglachas, and that's what I mentioned to you in the psukim, that maybe the tiglachas is not part of the tower. And not the way he does in Shiur Aleph. The problem is that it's more complicated than that. Certainly in Shiur Aleph, the tiglachas is a chelik of the chelkei hata'ara. Over here, you get the impression that the tiglachas is nothing. Okay? That also could be. It could be a machshir, it could be part of the tefillah, whatever you like. The problem is he says something which I have no clue how to interpret. When you're holding in Mitzvas Aseh Tzadik Gimel, it doesn't mean anything. However, when you're holding over here, it's very meaningful, and you probably forgot it already. Turn back to Aseh Tzadik Gimel, and he says like this. Kmo sheyesh lemitzera gam kein shtei tiglochos. Okay. Beheim mitzvah achas. The shtei tiglochos are mitzvah achas? What does it mean, the mitzvah achas? The mitzvah rishayna, the first mitzvah is tar rishayna, and the second mitzvah is tar shniya. So what does the tiglachas rishayna have to do with tar shniya? So maybe, and he says right over here, he should see what mitzvah the galech vi tar shniya. Maybe the Rambam holds that the tiglachas hashniya is only mitaher in as much as the tiglachas rishayna. And he doesn't mention tiglachas as part of the tar rishayna, but maybe it's really part of the tar shniya. Yes, but it's more than that. Because a priori, if I had said that, I would have said it's a hechsher. And there's no tar shniya, there's no tiglachas shniya without the tiglachas rishayna. If that's the case, there's no need to talk about it, Tzadik Gimel, because doesn't Shiur Yud say you don't count Agdoma in Minyan HaMitzvos? And really, the tiglachas rishayna is only Agdoma. So you get the impression, you know what it means, that the tiglachas rishayna and the tiglachas shniya merge together, and that is the tar shniya. And that's very odd, to say the least. Okay, let's go on. Kmoshis boy b'seif negoyim. Vu omro yis'ale b'hoye bayom hashvi'i yigaleach. And the pasuk also, bayom hashvi'i is only referring to Shnia. Ukva kodom lonu, where in Tzadi Gimel, he's referring back to it. Teref l'shoinam, shloisha megalchin v'tigilchosa mitzvah, hanozir v'metzera v'alevim. In Tzadi Gimel, he's bringing a raya from Nazir, that this tiglachas Nazir is a mitzvah. Here, in Mitzera, he's bringing a raya, that Mitzera is a mitzvah. We pointed out Levim is only it's a mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah l'shah. Ukva hisba'aru dine mitzvah zo b'seif negoyim. Now, let me just read to you something. Let give you an idea of what's going on, then we'll go back and we'll talk about it. Or maybe I hope we'll have time. Let's just get the text here in the Rambam. Now the Rambam is marich, and the purpose of the arichos is to explain the difference between mitzera and nazir. That in nazir, the tiglachas and the korbanos in mitzera, they're two separate mitzvahs, and in nazir, the tiglachas and the korbanos are one mitzvah. And the question is why, and that's the question which he's discussing over here. Ubekan avaya lecha. We have to, you have to, just an aside, the Ram doesn't always, when he asks the kasha, when he's sometimes very prolific about the question, when it's a question about a yisod, which he says, that yisod shvi is a mistake, or there's something about the yisod, the shloshim, which he mentioned, he asks a question. Here, the issue of whether mitzera and its korbanos and nazir and its kavanah should be two mitzvah and one mitzvah is not against any shayush per se, but it's a question of how to categorize the mitzvah. So here, I don't think that he feels there's a need to ask a question. He explains why it's so. It doesn't say kan yishal hashoya or kan yoyim. Uvekan avayer ma hasibo b'mnoisenu shemoninu kapach tiglachas ha-mitzera mitzvah fnei atzmo v'abovas korbanos mitzvah fnei atzmo v'lo na'aseh v'lo asinu kein b'nazir. In Moses it's avo shemonu avo moninu. Shemonu is a little bit odd, the shin. Or moninu. Monu is a little bit, it's the third person is made. Tiglachasai v'havos korbanos of mitzvah achas. In Nazir, the korban and tiglachas is one mitzvah inside the gimel. And here, in Mitzera, Ayin Zayin, and Kufir Aleph are two mitzvahs. And the Rambam answers like this. V'zeh ki ha-Mitzera ein kesher le-tiglachosai im havos korbanosai. There's no connection between the two. V'atachas hamagas b'tiglachosai zulas hatachas magas me havos korbanos. They're two separate entities. The tiglachas v'zeh ki ha-mitzera taroso tulu b'tiglachosai. The tiglachas shnia is a metai here. If you had any doubt that the Tiglachas is a Metayeh or not a Metayeh, but here it is, and he says in Mefurish. Ubeshishi min Nazirus, and this will be very important. Ma bein Nazir leMitzera, el shezeh ta'arosei tluye biyomov. You have a problem. What's the zeh? The Ram doesn't want to leave anything for chance. Kloima hanozir. The taras, the nazir ta'arosei tluye biyomov. Umitzera ta'arosei tluye b'kiglachosei. U'shemegalech hamitzera v'nishma tiglachosei ashniya. Toho Milatame Kesheretz. And the Ram learns, das Pshat in the Mishnah, that the Mishnah is saying that the Tiglachas of Mitzera is a Metayer from being a Sheretz. Kamoshi is Boya, B'Seif Negoyim, and that's in the Mishnah Perek Yudala, Mishnah Gimel. However, the Tiglachas is a Metayer, but it's not all over. The Yishayim Chus Kippurim, Hachi Korban Osav. Kisha Mechusah Kippurim, Kmo she's boyeshom, v'hoye tachlis tiglachosei shu tohom el tamik yisheretz hevi kavaros lehevi. If you do a tiglachas, when you bring the korbanos of Mechusah Kapara, you tohom the sheretz. V'tachlis havos korbanos shetishalin kaparosa, kisha mechusik kapor, kloima zav v'zov v'yoledis. See here, the Chacham will ask a question. I just told you in the Chera, it's a problem what I said, that since the Rambam formulates mechusik kapor, there is an element of tahara in the various mechusik kapor from zav and zova or whatever, but it's not, the mitzvah is not the tahara, the mitzvah is the chayvus hakova, and therefore he puts together the korbanos. If that's correct, this statement over here doesn't make any sense, because he says, v'sachlis havos korbanosov shetishalim kaparosoi kisha mechusik kapor kloima zav v'zov yoledis. It's a tachlis of the avos korbanos. It means there's two dinim, and you have, you can, in terms of the organization, you could have organized it with the chiv hakrova, and you can organize it as tuma, as tahara. But it's both. Otherwise, the statement doesn't make any sense. And the reason why, see, he could have said the reason why the mechusik kapor is a separate mitzvah, because the tiglachas is a metayer, and the chayvus korban is a separate chiv hakrova. He doesn't say that. He says it's a different tahara, and it's an independent tahara of the tiglachas. So the chayra, you have to say that both are part of the mitzvah. And then he says, kvar kodom lonu, loshen omrom, abo mechusik hapora. V'shom nisbaya, she'anoze eno mechusik hapora. It doesn't have a tahara in that kovas korban. Avo hamaaseh, hahu bichlolo. In here is interesting. The mass, this is also the Arabic tzno, hahu bichloloi, kloima, hagiluach vavos korban. He's basically putting giluach nozir together with havos korbanosov in Shirish and Beis. It's a seder of two performances. Yatiro, Yatiru lo shesias yayin, hayayin. V'lo yaspik mehem o echod, bilti o acher. Avo hagiluach niksha b'korban, v'korban niksha b'giluach. They merge together. And then he uses the language of Shirish Yud Aleph. using the language of shurs. And he says, Ube kibbutzam. But here kibbutz are very strange. They're not babasachas necessarily. Ube kibbutzam yagia hatachlis o echod. V'hu sheyutu lo hadvom shoy asurim alo b'mei hanazir. He's very clear and explains it without any shadow of doubt that in Nazir, it's one performance together, which is matir, the ayin. And in Mitzvah, they're two separate things and two separate metaharim. One is metayah, the two masheretz, that's tiglachas, and mechusik kippurim, are the karbonos mechusik kippurim, are matach chilas korban. Then the Ram continues, Ubeshishim in the Ziris, Omru, Gilach al hazevach, v'nimsa posel, tiglachasa psula. Why is it possible, the tiglachasa psula? Because the tiglachasa is only kosher as much as it relates to a zevach. So the zevach is posel, the tiglachas are posel. Uzvochav lo ololoi. Hine hisboya locho, ki atiglachas hi mitnai hazevach, v'hazevach mitno era. You can look at each one as a t'nai of the other one. And whatever it is, it's the same type of word that he used in Shiur Shvi. We're not sure if he's actually referring to that, because he says a t'nai there. He's talking about a t'nai that the mitzvah is done in different ways of a korban leviyored, ashiris, dalas, and dali dalas. In here, he's using the word t'nai that they're intertwined in a way you cannot separate them, and maybe mean something different completely. Uvekibutzam yagiu atachlis ha'echad, v'hu sheyutu la'advorim. Ki tiglachas hi mitnai hazevach v'hazevach mitnai ha'era. Ubetesefta, which is very interesting. I know he had a different Tesefta, I assume, because he quotes a Tesefta also, the same Tesefta in the Pirush HaMishnah Nozir, Perek Vav Mishnah Yud. It's a Braisa in Nozir. The Gemara Nozir quotes it Tes Vav Man Aleph. In two places, the Ram quotes a Tesefta, whatever it may mean. His boy Gamkein, Shenozir Shekol Yomov, also legaleach v'lishtos yayin l'tamar l'meisim ad sheya'aseh hama'aseh hahu, which is those two things, the korbanos kuloi. Who tiglachas ta'ava, kmo she's boy b'shishim l'ziris. Who she's galach pesach ol moed, v'yashach sa'ava tarazadud, v'yukrevu hakorbanos. Again, the same thing, that it's one long performance and one mitzvah. Kmo shebo b'kosav, v'ata timsim b'loy mekoymis yiku havos korbanos tiglachas. And there's a new thing here. If the Chachmei HaMesecha, the Matiki HaShmua, who is responsible for minyan HaMitzvos, and they call tiglachas, or they call yiku havos korbanos tiglachas, so means it's all one mitzvah. Whether how much chacham hizud v'reim, for when it's negeya to the matiki hashmua, the bale kavola mitzvahs, every nuance of what they say, the same way in Stam a question the Gemara Menachos mentioned that Tefillin Shalosh and Tefillin She'ada, 2 mitzvahs. We can derive from that the 2 mitzvahs in our mitzvahs. The fact that Avos Korbanos are called Tiglachas, we can prove that it's 1 mitzvah minyan mitzvahs. Ubebeya Omu, the Mekomis Mishnah Harini Nozir, Volai Legaleach, okay. Wetzeloi Meshiovi Korbanos of Nozir V'Yakivam Ba'adar. Volai Legaleach means Avos Korbanos. Again, it's the same thing. Amir Hashem, next week, I'll finish this off, and I hope they remember everything, because there is something to talk about, which we'll talk about Mitzvah Hashem as a sequel of this. Have a nice day.